Welcome to G Fun Facts Online, where we explore the fascinating and sometimes hidden stories behind the world we live in. Today, we're diving into a story that is not just a fun fact, but a deeply unsettling one. Imagine you're a citizen of your own country. You have a birth certificate, a passport, a life. Now imagine that country's own government arrests you, detains you, and deports you to a foreign land where you have no family, no connections, and don't even speak the language. This isn't a hypothetical scenario from a dystopian novel. This is a reality within the United States immigration system, a system so complex and flawed that it sometimes commits the unthinkable, deporting its own citizens and others with a legal right to stay. This is the legal maze of mistaken deportation. It's a story of bureaucratic failure, profound human cost, and a desperate fight for justice. So how does this happen? What are the consequences? And what can be done to fix a system that allows for such a fundamental breakdown of rights? Let's get into it. The most shocking failure of the immigration system is, without a doubt, the wrongful deportation of United States citizens. It's a core principle of U.S. law that a citizen cannot be deported. Yet, it happens. A report by the Government Accountability Office, or GAO, found that between 2015 and 2020, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, better known as ICE, deported 70 individuals who were potentially U.S. citizens. And experts believe that number is just the tip of the iceberg. Because the record-keeping is so inconsistent, these aren't just numbers on a page. Each one represents a life turned upside down. Take the case of Mark Little, a U.S. citizen with mental disabilities. In 2008, he was deported to Mexico. He had no family there. He didn't speak Spanish. For 125 days, Mark wandered, lost. He traveled through Mexico, Honduras, and Nicaragua, experiencing homelessness, abuse, and even imprisonment before he finally managed to find his way back to the United States. His case eventually resulted in a $175,000 settlement with the federal government, but no amount of money can erase that trauma. Or consider Maria de la Paz, a U.S. citizen who was deported by border officers simply because they didn't believe a U.S. citizen would only speak Spanish. She spent years in Mexico, fighting to prove her identity and return to her own country. So why does this happen? The causes are deeply embedded in the system itself. Flawed government databases and inconsistent training materials are a major part of the problem. For example, official ICE policy says a supervisor must be consulted when someone claims they are a U.S. citizen. But the GAO found that training materials often tell officers they can make that life-altering decision all on their own. Even worse, when citizenship is eventually verified, the data systems used by ICE often aren't updated. This means a person who has already been wrongfully detained could be flagged again and again, perpetually at risk. According to the Transactional Records Access Clearinghouse, between 2002 and 2017, ICE wrongly identified at least 2,840 U.S. citizens as potentially deportable and took 214 of them into custody. It's a systemic failure to protect the most fundamental right of citizenship. Beyond the shocking cases of citizens, a much larger number of mistaken deportations happen to non-citizens who have a legal right to be in the country. These errors are often the result of a system that is complex, overburdened, and lacking in basic safeguards. First, let's look at the immigration courts. Housed within the Department of Justice, the Executive Office for Immigration Review is facing an unprecedented crisis. There is a backlog of well over 1 million cases. This puts enormous pressure on immigration judges and court staff. In this high-stakes, high-speed environment, critical details get missed. A common and devastating error is the failure to properly notify someone of their deportation hearing. If you don't know you have a court date, you can't show up to defend yourself. You lose your chance to present your case, a fundamental violation of due process that can lead directly to a wrongful removal order. Another massive driver of wrongful deportations is the crisis in legal representation. In the U.S. criminal justice system, you have a constitutional right to a government-appointed attorney if you can't afford one. In the immigration system, you do not. This is a critical distinction. Studies consistently show that immigrants who have a lawyer are dramatically more likely to win their case. Yet, an estimated 70% of people in immigration detention face a judge completely on their own, trying to navigate one of the most complex areas of American law. Even when someone does manage to find a lawyer, the quality of that representation can be a matter of life and death. A legal term, ineffective assistance of counsel, describes when a lawyer's performance is so poor that it effectively denies their client a fair trial. In an immigration context, this could mean a lawyer failed to tell their client that pleading guilty to a minor crime would result in automatic deportation, a requirement established by the Supreme Court in the case Padilla versus Kentucky. It could mean the lawyer missed a strict deadline for filing an appeal, or simply failed to identify a valid path to relief, like asylum or cancellation of removal. The third major cause is the rise of a process called expedited removal. This is a fast-track deportation system that guts due process. Introduced in 1996, it allows a single, low-level immigration officer to act as prosecutor, judge, and jury, issuing a deportation order on the spot without a hearing before an immigration judge. Initially, this was used only for people apprehended right at the border. But the Trump administration expanded its use to apply to undocumented immigrants anywhere in the U.S. who couldn't immediately prove they'd been in the country for at least 2 years. This process is ripe for error. An individual caught in an expedited removal has little to no time to find a lawyer, gather evidence, or challenge the officer's claims. The burden of proof is flipped onto the individual to prove they have a right to be here, often in a coercive and stressful situation. This creates a huge risk of wrongfully deporting people with valid asylum claims, lawful permanent residence, and, as we've seen, even U.S. citizens. The consequences of these systemic failures are not abstract. They are measured in shattered lives and separated families. At its heart, every mistaken deportation is a story of family separation. A child loses a parent. A spouse is torn from their partner. A study by the Center for Migration Studies found that when a family member is deported, the household income can plummet by as much as 45%, pushing many families into poverty. Children of deported parents often suffer from anxiety, depression, and PTSD, and their schoolwork suffers. The story of Kilmar Abrego Garcia is a tragic example. He was a father living in Maryland who had a court order specifically protecting him from removal. But he was mistakenly deported to El Salvador anyway. His wife and children were left terrified and uncertain, while he was unjustly thrown into one of El Salvador's most notorious prisons. After a long legal battle that went all the way to the Supreme Court, he was finally returned to the U.S., but his family had already endured months of unimaginable trauma. And for those who are wrongfully removed, the nightmare is far from over. They are often sent to countries they barely know, sometimes places they fled from, where they face violence, persecution, and poverty. Consider the story of Nydia, a transgender woman who had been granted asylum in the U.S. because of the danger she faced in Mexico. After legally returning to Mexico for her mother's funeral, U.S. border officers wrongfully deported her. Back in Mexico, she was kidnapped by a cartel and forced into sex slavery. She eventually escaped and, after another arduous journey, was able to return to the U.S. as a lawful permanent resident. Her story is a horrifying testament to the life-or-death stakes of these so-called administrative errors. Getting back to the U.S. after a wrongful deportation is a bureaucratic nightmare. The government does not help. The burden of proof, the cost of travel, and the years of litigation all fall on the shoulders of the person who was already victimized by the system. So what is the path forward? How do we reform a system this broken? The problem of mistaken deportation highlights the urgent need for comprehensive reform. It requires a multi-pronged approach focused on strengthening due process, fixing the courts, and demanding accountability. First and foremost is strengthening due process. This means guaranteeing access to legal counsel, providing government-appointed attorneys for those who can't afford one in immigration proceedings would level the playing field and prevent countless errors. It also means drastically limiting the use of expedited removal. Everyone facing deportation should have the right to a full and fair hearing before a real judge. Second, the immigration courts themselves need to be reformed. Many experts argue that the courts should be made independent. Right now, they are part of the Department of Justice, the same executive agency that is responsible for enforcing immigration laws. This is an inherent conflict of interest. An independent immigration court system, like the federal judiciary, would ensure greater impartiality. And of course, the courts need more resources, more judges, more staff, and better technology to handle the massive backlog. Finally, we need accountability and oversight for immigration enforcement agencies like ICE and CBP. This means enhanced training on how to handle claims of U.S. citizenship. It means better data collection so we can actually see what's happening and hold agencies accountable. And it means creating a clear and accessible process for wrongfully deported individuals to return to the United States, with the government providing legal and travel support. The mistaken deportation of individuals from the United States is a profound injustice. It reveals deep, systemic flaws that go against our nation's professed commitment to due process and the rule of law. By understanding the causes and consequences, and by advocating for meaningful reforms, we can push for a more just and humane immigration system. The stories of Mark, Maria, Kilmar, and Nydia are a powerful reminder of what is at stake and why the fight for a fair and just system is more important than ever. Thanks for tuning in to G Fun Facts Online. Well, see you next time.